closely and as early as I'll be getting to know these people. But what's amazing about this experience, I think that we should all take away, is this is a moment of bonding. This is a moment of celebration around Black creativity, Black intellect, Black intelligence, and the ability and power to change things with the way that we think, the way that we use our hands, the way that we use our communities. So, without further ado, here I'll just jump right into a couple introductions about the panelists here. And throughout the night, if there are questions, feel free to raise it. I think you guys gotta raise your hands, but if you have questions, feel free to jump into the conversation, because again, this is a conversation. This is like a community town hall for creative minds. So, without further ado, I'll jump in. So, first and foremost, we have Renee Payne. Y'all give her a round of applause. So just a couple lines about Renee. Renee Payne is the founder and director of Favor Design. She has worked in the field of design for over 25 years, holding creative and executive positions at leading advertising in-house design groups such as Arnold, Caprini, did I say that right? Cipriani Kramer Design? Cipriani Kramer Design. And Renee's experience in multidisciplinary areas includes corporate identity, brand identity, and marketing communication strategy. Her work has spanned the marketplace from community organizations to Fortune 500 companies, presenting messages that are fresh, compelling, and highly effective. Next up, I want to introduce Danny Canton, who I had and one of the things that I can just immediately say that's interesting that we just shared and bonded around was the idea that creativity has an incredible opportunity in this moment in history. Creativity has the ability to persuade and change the way we perceive the world and its existence tomorrow. That's an incredibly powerful tool, right, when you think about that. And with that, I definitely want to dig deeper into that tonight. But Danny is the founder and managing partner of MIND, M-I-N-D. The acronym means My Ideas Never Die. He's inspired by the creative potential residing in every person. Danny is working alongside his co-founder, Jonathan Poulep-Safir. That's it? I know that. And fellow managing partners, Tiffany Federer and Troy Wade, to empower people to connect brands to the future of culture and ultimately establish a global, sustainable, and creative economy. Next, I got Jazzy Roulette. Did I say that right?
Yes.
This dynamic woman who I just met is here from, are you from LA?
I'm from Boston.
You're from Boston, but she also works in LA. Jazzy is a personal stylist, model, and blogger out of Boston. She has been in fashion for 10 years, but more recently diverted her focus to promoting sustainability in fashion. Beautiful Bostonian is a brand she created in 2012 that has since become a powerhouse for styling and networking throughout the city. Her goal for this upcoming year is to enhance Beautiful Bostonian by offering model mentorship and creative workshops for kids. You can follow her at The Beautiful Bostonian on Instagram. So make sure you check that out. Lastly, we have Craig Howard. So Craig Howard is a New York City-based footwear designer with 10 plus years of experience within the design industry. After graduating from Savannah College of Art, I love that city, yo. The city's so dope. It's kind of crazy. It's crazy, but it's dope. The creativity in that city is amazing. With an MFA in industrial design, he began his career working with icons such as Russell Simmons and Kimora Lee Simmons at Phat Farm, And from that experience he gained, Craig assisted in launching startup footwear brands for Nick Cannon and other various celebrities. Years later, he transitioned to designing at one of the most globally recognized athletic brands at Reebok, where his main objective was to design innovative products and create stories, which resulted in creating products that generated over millions of dollars in revenue for the company. He is now using his talents at Champion and currently the design manager of footwear and accessories there, leading 2 teams of designers for the future of design for that company. So, y'all give him one big round of applause. All right, so here's the fun part. This is where we get to know him. All right, so look, my name is Byron Morgan. I'm a strategist from Mullen Lowe. And one of the things I think that is probably like a strength of mine that I'm going to try to draw on tonight is those personal conversations that people typically have with me when they first meet me, and I don't know why they're telling me these things. So I'm hoping to summon that superpower tonight to have a great conversation. So I'm going to throw this one out on the floor, and whoever dives at it first, you can have this one. So how did you get started in the creative fields that you guys respectively chose to endeavor upon?
Go with it.
That was the go first?
So, as he was explaining, I'm a footwear designer. So, sneakers to me was like a pretty big thing growing up. So, I was a huge sneakerhead. My uncles are like really into it, kind of got me into it, kind of got me started into it. So once I realized that you can actually design them, like I didn't know that you could actually create them, because I'm spending all this money, or spending all my mom's money to to buy these shoes, and like not knowing that you actually could create them. So once I realized that you could do that, then I kind of got into like, oh, how do you do that? So I researched like, how do you become a footwear designer? And one of the things was you have to go to school for fashion or industrial design, which is ID. So ID is like the study of mass-produced products. So anything that's mass-produced, so cars, your cell phone, computer, shoes, whatever it is. But I was just really into footwear. So I got into that, went to SCAD, and then after that, kind of just, once I graduated, I reached out to some friends like how to get into the actual like space itself, into becoming a designer. And they were like, well, you have to create a portfolio for footwear itself. So I did that, and then just got an internship, like busting my ass. Can we curse? Okay. I just want to accidentally curse like that. I just want to make
I'm from a sailor's town, so you might hear the F-bomb slip a couple times.
just put it out there. Now I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so busting my ass, got an internship, thank you, and just working my way up the corporate ladder. Now I'm here.
Go next. I'm going to go way back. And it really started when I was in high school. And I'll say I'm a product of the civil rights movement. My parents were very, very active in that movement. And I think what was so important about that time was creating, again, through those that really stood for the March on Washington, just the acts for education that came from that period, that opportunities were available to say, I'm going to walk into a company and know that I have the right to walk into a company as somebody in high school and be exposed to what was happening. And my parents had a huge influence in that way, and it was, again, when I was in high school, I seek the best in the industry at that time. In Boston, that was Gunn Associates. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Gunn. It was a firm that was on Newbury Street. And they did everything. They had the Reeboks and the Converse and the Parker Brothers at the time, all of the big accounts. And great talent was there as well. And again, it was seeking to be exposed to the best very early in life and know that I could have that opportunity because of those that came before me to do that. So when I was in high school, I had a huge red portfolio, took the training, went into Gunn Associates, and it changed my whole world. You know, it was my first time being exposed to anything in the industry. I was a young black girl that, you know, they didn't know at the time who I was. There was no, again, email. It was a direct resume that went in there. But they took the time. And, it, you know, it really changed my world. And one, because they took the time, but also because I saw what I wanted. And, you know, the amazing thing is, you know, I won't go through all my career, but 15 years later, I ended up being an associate at Gunn. So the doors I walked through, you know, it gave me the focus before I went into college. I went to RISD, and I'm back there now doing a 3-year social equity inclusion fellowship. So I've come full circle for the purpose of knowing how important it is to be exposed when you're very, very young. So that's how I really got exposed to the industry, and I could be here for the rest of the night talking, so I'm not going to do that. But that was a start, and that opened the door for me.
We will put a pin in that, because I totally want to come back to that.
Hey, Byron, before the next question, can you just ask people to come in and sit on the floor in front?
Oh, yeah, certainly. If there are more individuals. Yeah, there are a couple spaces for seating on the floor if you'd like.
Thank you.
Make yourself at home. I love this, man. This vibe. It's great. Jazzy, you want to go next?
Yeah. Okay, so when I got out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Wasn't even stylish. Hadn't cut my hair yet. Didn't know what my vibe was at all. I went to Miami for 2 years, and I was in nursing school, and I played Division II basketball, and you know, was doing that, living that whole life. I decided to come back to Boston after 2 years, and that's kind of when I started getting into fashion. A friend of mine was on Project Runway maybe 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, and she needed a model for a runway show, and I had never modeled before and was horrified to tell her that I would do it. And then I accepted, and honestly, following that one event, I started walking in shows regularly and made connections and networked, and I ended up meeting people that got me into modeling more seriously, and then I got signed like a year later. And started just doing work and meeting people, and since then I've just been figuring out what I want to do creatively. I model, obviously. I want to act. I also do some graphic design and videography and just a little bit of everything. Moving forward, I created Beautiful Bostonian in 2012, but I want to mentor and do workshops and just get people thinking about what they want to do creatively, because I don't think there's a lot of kind of structure in the city to figure that out, because I literally didn't know until I was like 21. 26 now. But yeah, I want to do more to get people brainstorming, and yeah, that's how I got it.
Dan?
Yeah, very similar story. Graduated high school, had no idea what I wanted to do as a kid. Was always super creative. I was always like anything I can get my hands on to be creative with. I would use that to express myself, but I never thought that creativity could be a career path. So graduated high school, started off in computer science, and like job security, that's a thing. And after about being like 2 years into school, realized yes, I'm getting all this information, but the one thing that I'm not being taught is, who am I? What drives me? How do I make sure that, when I leave this earth, I'm leaving with, an empty, peaceful heart? So from there, went out to California to visit a friend, and became inspired. I was like, oh, I saw a whole other, because I grew up in Boston, New England, and the main career paths that were really pushed were either in the sciences, technology, education. So I was out in California for a bit, went all over the coast, and was exposed to the creative industry. So came back, was like, yes, fashion, that's it, I want to get into fashion design. Came back, and where there was all this opportunity in the computer science industry, like that opportunity just was not there, like creatively. Because even if you were graduating from the top design schools, right, you weren't, like, there was no like roadmap to get the resources that you needed. So that really got me thinking from a human level,
Yeah.
right? How can we give people the tools that they need to be able to produce on the highest level? So that got me doing research into just the creative industries as a whole, and what really caught my eye was this approach of collaboration, right? You started seeing artists like Cause collaborating with Jordan. You saw Pharrell collaborating with like Nigo and Bape, and you saw all these like really cool projects, and I'm like, wow, this is to me, I think that this is a really big opportunity for independent creators, regardless of the industry, to be able to take, an individual and get them connected to like the infrastructure from a big brand to produce,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm like, okay, I think this is the formula. So like plug myself into the Boston scene, and this was right around the tech startup boom, and I can't find a mentor. Can't find a blueprint. I can't find the, it's like, hey, if you want to build an app, if you want to start a restaurant, if you want to do all these other things, like the blueprint is there, but it's like if you want to be yourself, if you want to be creative, it's a hobby,
Yeah.
right? So that was really like the core, like driving force that really motivated me to, help found mine. And I don't know if that answers the question, but
There are a couple of things there to unpack, actually. I think a couple of things that we'll probably touch on, just unpacking that a bit. I think mentorship, right? Yeah. I think this idea of the blueprint, I think that's an interesting conversation I want to put a pin in. A third thing is, I think when it comes to that sense of community, I think even Jazzy hit on this, the sense of community. Let's just segue into that conversation, because I like that. I like that conversation. That's a good place to start, because we actually have that here tonight in our forum, right? Community. So I think Renee started with that in some regard, right? With the experience that you first got when you were in high school. And that environment was enriching in that way because it was a community of high-performing creatives. Tell me a little bit more about that experience, and then what I want to do is I want to come back to some other experiences so we can start to build on that conversation together.
Sure. I think it set the foundation to want to pursue art school in general and have a focus while I was there. I also think, again, it had so much to do with the era that I came through. It was also a time of affirmative action. So those opportunities just started at that time of realizing the importance of minorities having a place. When I was at RISD, I continued to intern. And my first internship was at Prudential Insurance Company. And it came also through affirmative action. And what was really interesting about that and that sense of community is again, it was myself and my sister. We lived outside of Boston, ended up taking a van into Prudential every day. The whole van was white men. I'm just going to be that direct, and that's not trying to be in any way derogative to anybody here. But it was. And it was a very difficult time because it was a tension because of affirmative action. That they had daughters the same age that we were. Why are we going into Boston and their children aren't going into Boston? But it opened another level of the door because that's when opportunities for communities started, you know, for minorities, you know, to understand what it is like to be in a corporate environment. Again, it was a whole another level of exposure for me. And, you know, I was in college but had a different understanding of the business world very early. And what I aspired to do. From RISD, I went to Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, which is a well-known architectural firm. My first experience was doing kind of environmental work. And the best thing about that, I failed. I failed very early because I couldn't draw a straight line. Like, thank God for computers. But from that, I fell into what shaped my life. I worked for a woman by the name of Cheryl Heller. Some may know who she is. She had a firm called Heller Brink. And again, you know, I was sharing this with somebody earlier. Sometimes it's not the formality of how we meet people, it's the informality. You know, ended up having the interview on the floor in her office, and we just connected. And I ended up working under a very, very talented, influential woman in graphic design, not even knowing the level of influence that she had, for 7 years. And, you know, there is something to consistency, setting the bar high very early. And I was in a position where the bar was set high for me because of who she was. And she was not a woman of color, she was a white woman doing exceedingly well at what she did. And you know, you have to just take it in like a sponge. No matter who you are, people are good at what they do, you glean from them. You know, and I did that for 7 years. You know, 3 years before I even touched doing it in my own work. And again, it's a very different era because people want to have their company even right out of school. You know, but there's something to learning from somebody and being under people that are good. And it set the bar for the rest of my career. And still does. Does that help a community?
No, it does. That's a good like foundation for the conversation and how important like community is, because community is nurturing, right? It's something that I think we as Black people inherently know, right? Community is an important part of allowing us to, one, show up as ourselves, but also, two, creating a space for us to actualize our abilities and try and fail in a safe space where we're not left asked out for lack of words, right? But let's talk about like absence of community, because let's be frank, in the world where we live in today, it's funny, piggybacking off of the civil rights thing, my dad, I had a conversation with him in December. We were going through photo albums, and I saw a picture where he was marching with Jesse Jackson. I didn't even know that. Right? I'm like, Dad, what is this? What are we doing? And that moment for me was like incredible for a lot of reasons. But the thing that he said in response to us having the conversation, though, was the thing that stood out most. He said, you know, even in that time, I felt like I had more of a community. I've never lived in a time where it's more divisive. And my dad grew up in the 50s, right? Like 50s, 60s, like interesting times in culture, in American history. And for him to say something like that, it's kind of like, interesting. So I say that to segue into this conversation, right? A lot of people would say there's an absence of community that exists, especially in some of the most urban cities, like a Boston, a San Francisco. Sometimes even in places like LA and New York, especially if you're a transplant. So let's talk about how that feels, like, and what's been the experience, if you're comfortable going there. Yeah?
Oh,
Sure.
I didn't know if this was
Danny,
recorded.
Danny,
Okay, so I moved to LA last April, and I came back in January of this year. And I feel like, okay, that information. I realized how important community was to my craft and creativeness. I didn't realize it was as substantial to my process as it was. When I was in LA, I was doing work and, meeting people and continuing to do what I was doing. But there was like a lack of passion, I'll say. Very nice meeting new people and building relationships with new brands. But what I got out of creating in Boston was deeper than just creating an amazing project. It was more about creating something amazing with, people I grew up with, or a photographer that I made a really, really amazing connection with, or working with a designer who I've watched their entire, craft evolve over the last 10 years. That brings more passion to the project.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get closer to that. And I made the decision to move back home for that, just because I missed the way projects make me feel.
Yeah.
It's not just about modeling or creating a film or a brand or whatever. I think for me, I learned that for my brand specifically, the community brought a lot to it.
Yeah.
More than just me or my talent or whatever I do. It's more about the people that went into creating the project for me. So that's why I came back home.
Interesting. How about you?
Yeah, on the topic of community, I think it's so important, and I don't think that media does a good job of truly communicating that. I think there's this misconception of, I call it the CEO misconception, the pioneer misconception, that, it's one individual that makes something happen alone. That's never the case, right? Whether you're looking at an individual that's running a small company or a, multi-billion-dollar company, it's you and the people that you are surrounded by.
Yeah.
And I feel like the world has encouraged environments that are fueled by ego, right? And it's all about, how can I dominate the room? How can I dominate the people that are around me? How can I absorb as much energy as possible and give as little back as possible? And for like the creative communities on a global level, right? For us to be able to make the impact that we need to in the world, for us to get the resources that we need, we have to make a unified stand to support each other, right? We have to acknowledge the strengths that are within us and figure out how can we be a steward, how can you contribute your best self to those around you, so that at the end of the day, if you have $1 million in the bank account, but you can't spend a dime of it on what you love, or you're all alone, it means absolutely nothing, right? So one thing that Boston has really, really taught me is the importance of community, right? It's as you going out to LA, firsthand, I'm sure you saw the egos, I'm sure you saw the individuals that are being lost in the ultimate image, right? And at the end of the day, all we as people really want to be able to do is what we love. It doesn't matter if you're an accountant, a designer, an engineer, a lawyer, whatever it is, right? It's about doing what you love with the people that you love and experiencing the things that you love. And for me, it's just like we as people need to come together and start figuring out how can we build a real community? How can we feel safe around each other? How can we, you get into things such as emotional vulnerability, you get into just be authentic, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many different positive outcomes of being able to build a strong community. So it's necessary.
So I definitely want to put a pin in emotional vulnerability, because I think that's an important conversation to have, especially amongst a room of Black folks. I want to talk to Craig for a second about, growing up in an environment like a Phat Farm during a time where that was such an iconic brand in hip hop, and working with two very iconic people in just pop culture, hip hop culture, in general. Because I think when talking about community, I think that's an important part of that too, right? The exposure, right? Because the other part of community is, you can have a supportive community of individuals nurturing your creativity and passion, But a mentor once told me, and we can talk about this. A mentor once told me this one thing that I hold true to my heart to this day. He said, there are 3 people that you always want in your life. The first is the person you aspire to be. And why? Because that person is basically your North Star. The person that can help you navigate the potholes in the road ahead of you. Probably in a way as that graphic designer was for you. The second person that you want in your life is somebody that's in the trenches with you, right? Somebody that'll tell you clearly, stop bitching and keep going, right? You know, at the end of the day, like, or if you're slacking, they will separate themselves from you, right? Because they're all about progress, or vice versa. But that person in that trenches is more of a benchmark for you, right? For your successes. And then the third person is a person that aspires to be where you are. And that person keeps you accountable. Because the last thing you want to do is look bad in the eyes of some kid you just told you about to be a graphic designer, right? And you never picked up a pencil in your life, right? So, you know, growing up in that environment, in that industry, right? What were some of the things that you gleaned from that you feel like have been, you know, additives to your career? And are there things from that communal experience that was helpful, right? Like growing up in that time, right?
For sure. I think about when it comes to building community, as we're talking about, before you can even build a community, you have to build a relationship. So to get to that point, you have to actually be like open, you want to talk, you want to, you know, meet people, you want to network. And I think I was kind of growing up kind of like closed off, like I'm too cool guy, I don't speak to anybody, like kind of nonchalant, kind of like standoffish. So once I was able to like actually ask people questions and say, you know, how does this work? How do you do this? You know, and stop being afraid to ask for help. That's when I started building relationships, and that's when communities kind of started to form. Not, I mean, I wasn't in the community, but just around me, just being part of that community. So like, as far as advice goes, oh, for sure, you just got to be able to network, be open, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's one of the things that hinders all of us, being able to just say, hey, like, how did you do this? Or like, how did you get here? Or what it took for you to get here? Just taking those steps to even get to that point in the first place.
And I guess to segue into that, right, like, that takes a level of emotional vulnerability in some way, right? And I think, you know, for any of the panelists, if you guys want to, you know, talk about this, what was it like, sort of like tapping into that emotional vulnerability and being able to put yourself out there in front of someone, right? Because as creatives, we're all super sensitive about our work and how it's perceived, especially early on, right? And how do you overcome that? Like, how do you have a conversation about the hurdles or the struggles that you're dealing with, or what you want access to?
I'll speak to that.
Okay.
I think vulnerability comes with trust. And I think in order to open up, there's got to be a certain level of trust that you have with those people that are part of your community. I think those 3 words are critical when you talk about community. It's relationship and it's also trust. And, you know, but it works on a lot of levels, you know, because you can be in a position where you need to be vulnerable because of a work situation that you're going through. But then there's another level when you're working with clients that sometimes the breakthrough comes with a client when something vulnerable happens and they see you as a human being and you see them as a human being. Because part of client relationship is trust. And again, you know, I do work a lot with leadership, helping them to see further than they can see creatively. And that requires vulnerability. And the trust part comes with that confidence that you hold for other people. And I think it's something to always remember, because that expectation works both ways. You know, once you hit the trust, you have to be confident about that in order for people to continue to trust you. And I think that that's really carried me through, again, till now. I think one of the most vulnerable periods for me is when I left the agency and decided that I was going to start my own business. And it came at a very difficult juncture because I went in, I was at Arnold Worldwide, helping to head up their design group. And the same day that I went in for my review was the same day that I got laid off. And that was totally unexpected, but not. Because I had hit, in the industry, they say you hit a certain glass ceiling, but that's just the industry standards. We know that our ceiling can go as high as we decide we're going to take it.
Indeed.
But in the industry, that's part of what was happening. They could hire 3 people for what my position held. But I was also at a very vulnerable place because I had 3 children that were at a period where they were getting ready to go into high school, college. And again, these are the things that you aspire for. So in that vulnerable time, believe it or not, what I turned to was my community. I went back to church. That was the foundation that I came into. But believe it or not, that set the foundation for me coming out of the industry and going back in. I seriously went back to the roots of those things that my grandmother would pray for me, and knowing where I can kind of renew my strength from. And it was a very vulnerable season for me, but it turned around. And I realized that I had to face that part of myself in order to understand others and their vulnerability. And that's carried me, again, for a long time. So it's important to be vulnerable.
Absolutely. And to build off that point, I think trust is so key, right? Not just trusting the people that you are surrounding yourself with, but being able to trust yourself, being able to trust your inner voice. Knowing that if you are called and convicted to tackle something that maybe has never been done before. Maybe you have 100 voices around you telling you no. You have to trust your intentions, and you have to trust your vision and your actions, and just really stay true. Be vulnerable with yourself, right? If you're hurting, it's okay to tell yourself hey, I'm hurting, and then also find those people that that you can trust, that you can call up and say, hey, I'm feeling this. One of the things that I'm so grateful for is my managing partners, right? For us it's bigger than this. Over the course of the past 5 years, I don't know how many times we've each broken down crying to one another in one way or another. But to me it's so important, because if I didn't have that support system, I don't know where I would be today. And so so it's so important. Trust yourself, trust those that are that you surround yourself with, and be vulnerable and honest with yourself, and know that no matter what, it's keep your faith in the end goal. The path will reveal itself.
Any other thoughts?
To play off what you were talking about, building trust. So trust normally is built through experiences. Anytime you trust someone, you experience numerous of things.
Yep.
So with that being said, you kind of just have to, I lost my train of thought for a second. Just give me a second. Experiences, right? So you have to be able and willing to take the risk and take chances to even create these experiences in the first place, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't be afraid to fail. So the more opportunities you take, the better off you become, and the more you grow, the more you can build trust within yourself. Because trust is also confidence. So the more prepared you are for the situation, the more confident you are for the situation.
Yeah.
So you have to take these initiatives to build trust in yourself by gaining experiences, and being confident and not being afraid to fail. Just a really key to success.
Yeah, for sure.
In gaining experiences, I think it's really important to uplift the younger people around you, because that's going to also enhance your understanding of what you're doing, and teaching it to somebody else, who may not have had the opportunity or exposure to learn whatever it is that you're specifically good at. I think that enhances the community and trust, and kind of overall morale of the community overall. So I wanted to throw that in.
I like that, and I building on the idea of trust, and especially trusting yourself. So how do you maintain a sense of trust in yourself when an environment commands you to basically alter your identity to exist within it?
Tough.
Do you want me to go first? Okay, so I worked for a company for 5 years. I won't disclose the company because it's not about them. But I was a personal stylist and was in leadership, and front to back, the company definitely made me change who I was, just so that I could perform well, and it really altered my energy. And it was actually working here at this place that allowed me to process what I actually wanted to do and what I was actually passionate about and what fueled me. Which is again why I came back to the community. But I really want to do things every day that fuel me and inspire my passion and my creative process. And I think you cannot allow a job or anything that you're a part of to take away from your energy in that way, because you need it. And I had to learn that. It's one of the biggest things that I learned in the last year. It's you can't just allow anybody or any company to consume your energy. Like, you need it as well to do whatever it is that you want to do on the side, or if you have a passion project or a hobby, or you're going to need your own separate energy for that as well. You can't give all of it away at work, as much as they want to take it all away. But yeah, ultimately, I think a job is essential in pushing whatever your side brand is. You need money to facilitate your dream. Like, you have to be putting in the same hours that you're putting in at work, and you have to have the energy to do that. So.
Yeah, and I also think being aware of your personal intentions is so key, right? For me, daily meditation is a big part of my personal process, and taking the time to reflect on, not just what am I doing, but why am I doing what am I doing? Because it's easy to find a million naysayers, or it's so easy to be misunderstood. But I think, like, if at your core, at the core of your being, what you're doing, why are you doing it, what is it going to take to make that happen, and are you willing to take the steps? I think if we're all able to answer those questions for ourselves every single day, right? It doesn't matter. The timing doesn't matter, right? I think one thing that's key is trusting the process, trusting yourself, and knowing that everything is going to happen the way that it's supposed to, not necessarily the way that you think it's going to go. And I think that really knowing, like, why are you doing what you're doing, that's going to ultimately, when that journey has gone on a little bit longer than you might have liked, or there's a barrier that's in front of you, you have that power, that creativity, that inner drive to go up, down, through, around, or whatever it takes to get to that end goal. I think that inner understanding is.
I also think that, life happens in seasons. So you might be saying this today, but it could be different 2 years from now. It could be different when you have a family. It could be different when you're a caretaker for somebody else. That ability to creatively flow at a certain level is going to really depend on where you are in your life. So I think it's important to hold on to the foundation of the things that we're talking about. Oftentimes what I try to do is almost a 5-year plan on a regular basis. Take note, like you're saying, of those things that you're saying now, the things that are important, the vision that you have for yourself, and assess it, whether you do it every year, every other year, because you're not going to be the same place you were 2 years ago. I can guarantee that. You know, so you really have to hold on to those principles that you know are important, you know, to feel whole for yourself and to flow creatively.
Greg, you got any thoughts there?
A lot of those, probably
Okay.
too many of
What
those,
you
but I think some of the places that I worked in the past, I feel like culturally they kind of want you to be a certain way,
Yeah.
and they're using you because you know the culture, you know the community,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that's where a lot of issues come into play. So there's, what I normally say is you just gotta just be yourself. You know, you can't be afraid to stand up and say, you know, I don't wanna do this, or I don't think this is right, or this doesn't make any sense. Like, there's normally two ways to deal with pressure. Like you're gonna feel the pressure, or you're gonna apply the pressure. So you kinda wanna be in the stance where, I'm not saying be rebellious and like, say, fuck this place, but you wanna voice your opinion and don't be afraid to voice your opinion. Because if not, they're just gonna walk over you.
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting, right? Because I think in corporate environments, in, you know, even let's just say adult extracurriculars and clubs and social groups, things like that, right? Oftentimes, especially in cities predominantly white like Boston or Seattle or Portland.
That's already bad.
When you're in those rooms, oftentimes you're looked at as the expert. Or, to your point, you feel the pressure of being used in those environments, right? And there's an element of mental tax that happens, right, in those environments. So one of the things that I'd love to get you guys' thoughts on is like handling that. Any advice on navigating that? Or is it okay to just basically say, nah, I'm not doing that, right? Like, or this isn't the way we should go about it. Like, tell me how you guys typically navigate sort of that mental tax in those scenarios.
Well, like I was saying before, you just kind of gotta voice your opinion. Like, you can't just stand back and just say, yeah, I'll do it. You know, like if you don't feel like it's right, doesn't make sense to the company or brand or corporate life, wherever you work, you have to just speak up and say something. What's the worst case scenario? Like, you're gonna fire you. They're not gonna fire you because you voice your opinion, but don't. That's my advice. Be cautious. But yeah, just you gotta just voice your opinion, stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid to take chances, especially if you feel like it's not right for you as a person, but also not right for whoever you're working for. And if it's gonna make the community or culture look bad, you definitely don't do it. Because you, for example, I had this conversation earlier today, maybe like 2 years ago, there was, for Adidas, it was Black History Month, and they had like the shoe coming out, and it was an all-white shoe for Black History Month. But for that to pass, like so many people within the company, like all the heads, PMs, and no one said anything until it came out in public, and then the public is like, you know, this isn't right. But that's an issue in itself, because the people that are there in the company, someone's got to say something, you know? And this is what I mean, you guys can just speak up. What's your opinion? Don't be afraid to.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I
Where do you
mean,
think that fear comes from?
The fear?
Like to speak up?
Yeah.
Oh, fear is like, it's your imagination, right? So it hasn't actually happened. So you're telling yourself, if I do this, this is gonna happen to me. This is gonna be repercussions of me doing this. But it hasn't actually happened. So just your imagination. But you're probably thinking in that sense, like, if I speak up, they're probably gonna fire me, or I'm probably gonna lose money, or I'm probably gonna get cut. Like, so this is what I'm saying. You gotta be able to somewhat have courage to bypass that.
Yeah.
What are you gonna say?
That's good.
I think all that's
A couple
real.
thoughts.
All that's real.
I think Renee had some jazzy ass stuff. What do you got?
I'm
She's like,
speaking
nah, fuck that.
in terms of modeling and influencing and media in that aspect. There are a lot of companies who, not a lot, most companies, they have like the token white girl, the token black girl, the, skinny blonde girl with blue eyes, and then the Indian girl, so that they can have like a diverse spread and all that.
Racially ambiguous.
I think that's, it's something that's being practiced extensively in media right now, and I think it is one of the hardest things going on, because if you're not, one of those token people, you don't get the work. So I think to combat that, create your own stuff.
Yes.
So that, again, is what brought me back to my community. But I think a lot of my work that touched a lot of people, I created myself with my team that I, grew up with and know really well. Like, these companies aren't gonna choose you, so you have to choose you. So I realize you have to speak up and, fight for your name and all that. But that's exhausting. And you shouldn't have to, consistently be battling to be seen. Create that for yourself. And I think if a lot of people kind of take a step back and stop relying on, businesses or brands or whomever to shine a light on them, and they did it for themselves, there will be a lot more projects and a lot more kind of coming to light from all these people that are being overlooked.
Yeah. And I'd say, know your value, right? Know your value. Don't ever let anybody tell you otherwise, right? And don't let someone else's no turn into the reason why you completely give up, right? Let that be the fuel to say, hey, I'm going to prove myself, right? I feel like it's easy to try and do things to prove other people wrong, but I feel like it's much easier I feel like it's much more, you create a much more positive, energetic loop when you're able to say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna prove this to myself, and I'm gonna prove this to every individual that believes in me. And I think, we can create an open door, right? Because, while someone might, people love to hop on trends, they do. So, for me, it's like, stick to your gun, be consistent, and show the world that show the world what they need, even when they may not necessarily know what they need. I think it was what was it, Henry Ford that was saying, it's like if he didn't stick to his guns with rolling out his automobiles, right, the community would still be driving horses and buggies, right? If you ask an audience what do you want, they're gonna say, oh, we want a faster horse. So for me, it's really, know your worth. It doesn't matter what someone has accomplished in their life. It doesn't matter what their status or position ultimately is. Right, again, going back to your core intention. If you know that your intention is good, is to be able to build up yourself, provide something for your loved ones and your community. At then you're going to succeed.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Don't look to the world for permission. Just do what you know is right, and and as long as it's, and open yourself up to the consequences. It's like, if you know that your intention is spiteful, don't be surprised if someone comes at you in a negative way, but if you're going at it from purely positive to make a positive impact, right, people are gonna recognize that, and people that are standing against that, their true colors are gonna show.
That's true. That's true. Renee, did you have anything?
I agree with that. I think value is so important. And I think so often we have to understand the position that we're in to stand to say no, but also to stand to explain why no. Because oftentimes people they're ignorant, and I'm not saying that in a negative sense. It's a reality that sometimes people just don't understand because they haven't had the exposure. So you have to recognize that you might be that individual that changes their whole perspective of how they see the next person coming through that door of color, just by the way you respond to a situation. And that's not just on a job, that's wherever we go. You know, we constantly represent who we are for other people and how they're perceived by how we respond. So.
That's actually a good segue into the next question here. And Tomo, you gotta keep me honest on time, so just, you know, I can talk all night. Especially with this group of minds. I got so many things I wanna talk about right now.
I think we have 5 minutes, Brian.
Oh, God.
Because we started
All right.
at 7:45.
Okay, all right, so I got about
You got 5 minutes.
3 more questions. We're gonna try to tuck that into 5 minutes. You know, we be running late anyway, so. So, when looking at this in particular, right, like, so there are obviously like structural things that we deal with within a company or within environments that we navigate on a day-to-day basis. But there are also these reinforcing perceptions in the media. And that's, especially in today's environment, right, that's really hard to kind of navigate or even have conversations about, especially in such a polarized space we live in where people can choose to circulate information in the communities that they want to circulate information in, hang out with the friends that they want to hang out. Like, social media has just made that so easy for us to remain divided and just completely put the blinders on in our lives. So when it comes down to like educating or having those conversations, to your point of enlightening someone else, where do you start?
I don't know, I didn't know if you were looking at me.
I'm looking at you. You look like you're ready to
You
go.
can look at all of us at the same time. I feel the same pressure. I'm like,
Is this question directed at how Black people are depicted in the media?
It's how Black people are depicted in the media. Outside of that, but also in general, like, those things reinforce perceptions about ourselves, right?
So
Or
this was one of
show
the questions
identities.
that I had trouble answering
Mhm.
because it's not something that I pay a lot of attention to. So I think Black people, Black males, Black women, there are a lot of stigmas in the media about how we act, what we look like, what our personality is. And I think that's just ignorant, and we shouldn't follow or interact with things that aren't true. And I try to create things that kind of combat that norm. I think over the last year, specifically, I've been seeing a lot of work surrounding just like softening Black men, and I love that. And I think just not really paying attention to what everyone else is saying and moving in what you actually are, just being, is how we should combat it.
Yeah.
Both in enlightening younger people and just moving. I think we should just have your blinder on and keep all the ignorance out.
Yeah.
Because that's all that is.
Yeah, for me, it's, you know, both as creators and consumers, non-compliance. I feel like there are, like, both as creators and as audiences, we become very comfortable with what from the creator side, what opportunities are in front of us, right? It's like, as creators, as long as the money is right, you know, the industry norm is like, yeah, let's make this happen. And then from the audience side, it's, you know, it's very, you know, it makes me think back to, you know, Lupe Fiasco's Dumb It Down,
Yeah.
right? It's, you know, when it comes to consumerism, right? It's like, let's just absorb as much as we can. Let's have this as dumbed down and simplified as possible. And I think as, you know, as audiences, we need to demand better. As creators, we need to take responsibility for what we put out into the world. I was mentioning earlier, I was going through Pinterest today, one of my biggest sources of inspiration, and I came across this shot of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie and, you know, all their kids, right? And I was shocked, right? Because, you know, you would think that even when curating a shoot for a family, right, you would have this inclusive, universally loving dynamic, right? But that's not how the shot was set up, right? You had, you know, like Brad sitting, like they were sitting on the chair, what was it, on a staircase, right? And, you know, in the front, like the kids were literally, it was a color gradient. You at the very front in Brad's lap, you had, you know, the blonde hair, blue eye, and then all the way in the back, you had his dark kids. Literally, it was a color gradient. And that was something that I saw today, and I was literally mind blown. And it was even to the way that Brad and Angelina, it's not like, hey, let's pose and smile. It was, you know, Brad and Angelina were interacting, like, and showing affection to the lighter complexion children.
Yeah.
And the two darkest ones in the back were just like, huh? That's what I want to know. And you know, and the thing is, you know, you obviously look at the tabloids and these different like magazines that are ultimately perpetuating this, and then you also have the audiences that are just like, oh, like they're looking at the glamour, but they're not looking at the truth that's in front of them. Yeah. And for me, I feel like, you know, one of the things that I'm excited about, you know, just this, to be at the beginning of a decade, right? We have the ability to really carve out a legacy, and I think mindful, organic, like content, conscious, creative content is so key, and I think that's where all of us come into play, right? We have to, from the community standpoint, we come together and say, hey, you know what? I want to be able to see, you know, movies that are produced by, you know, students that are graduating, schools that are communicating socially impactful messages, or whatever it is that we know that we need, right? We need to demand that, and as creators, we need to produce what we know the world legitimately needs, even if right now, you know, we don't necessarily know what the financial end result will be, but as long as we're able to come together from the creative side and the community side, you know, we're going to make a stand, and the world will adapt.
Any other thoughts?
I think you brought up education, and I think that's an important thing. I think it's training up to be aware of what works, what doesn't work, what feels uncomfortable, respond to the fact that it does not feel comfortable. I've been thinking today also about the whole Gucci campaign, the blackface campaign that was pulled. I look around this room at the beauty of this room and just the contrast of that particular campaign. And what I thought about, with those that are familiar with, again, the whole Gucci line that was just all around blackface, they pulled it. Recently at RISD, we just hosted the MLK series, and Michelle Alexander, who's the author of The New Jim Crow, was again the keynote. And again, this is a huge issue and concern that these things are happening now. The thing that I questioned was, as we've discussed, was there somebody there that did speak up? No. Was there somebody that did speak up and was not heard? And I think it's something that we all have to really consider, because I just can't imagine that would go through without any discussion. And we have to question those things. We might see the outcome, and all of a sudden they've hired somebody high on diversity that can handle it, But we can make that difference. How loud do we scream? To the point that it's going to cost you your job. But can you sleep at night knowing that you didn't do that? Right. So I think these are the things that we have to consider as we look at the media and our responsibility to change that. And part of that is how we educate very early the importance of recognizing what's right and what's wrong and what to do about that as creatives.
I think you said it all.
Well, I want to say thank you all. If you guys have any questions, I think you guys may be hanging around afterwards for a while, right?
Sure.
So I think there are drinks and food up front, right, Tomo?
Yes, yes.
Yep. So please indulge in libations and tasty treats from Daryl's. And thank you all for coming out, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.